Welcome to episode 138 of Board Game Blitz, a proud member of the Dice Tower Network, and a podcast about all things board games that you can listen to in less time than it takes to actually finish the joke. Pete and Repeat are in a boat. Pete fell out. Who was left?
Repeat.
Pete and Repeat are in a boat. Board Game Blitz is sponsored by Grey Fox Games. This week, we're talking about replayability in games. First, we discuss a couple games we played recently, like Flapjack Flipout, Project Nos, and 10. Then, we talk about what makes a game replayable. And now, here are your hosts,
Ambie
and Crystal. A couple quick announcements before we hop into the main episode. First off, I wanted to thank all of you who joined in our Extra Life charity fundraiser stream this past weekend. We raised over $1,000 for Extra Life and Children's Miracle Network, and that is because of all of you. So thank you so very much for those of you who stopped by the stream, who hung out, who played games. It was 5 hours of pure delight, and I literally laughed so hard that I cried, and I'm not even kidding. I was tears streaming down my face. That is how hard I was laughing at some of the mayhem that happened. So thank you everyone who showed up.
Yay.
The last announcement is on September 6th, which is Labor Day here in the States. I am going to be playing a one-shot RPG called Alice is Missing on our Twitch channel with a bunch of friends. And I am really looking forward to it because this RPG is unique in that instead of spoken words, the entire RPG is played through text messages. So it's going to be a weird stream because I'm going to be showing what is on people's screens, what they are messaging each other, and it's going to be different than a lot of other RPGs, but I'm really excited about it. That's going to be happening on Monday, September 6th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned and watch our social media channels for more information about that coming up in the near future.
Recently, I got a couple of review copies from Mind the Gap Studios, which is a newer publisher. The review copies I got are Flapjack Flipout and Project Nos. These are both designed by Peter Newland and published by Mind the Gap Studios. So Project Nos is actually a free print and play game. Actually, I think they have both available as free print and play games. But Project Nos, I had done a free print and play on one of my streams and played it solo. But it is a 1 to 4 player racing game that takes 15 minutes to play. And I had played a solo game, which is just racing against a timer. You want to get under 15 seconds to be the best, but that's really hard. So I had wanted to play multiplayer, but now that I have it's kind of like a pre-production copy, I think, because I don't think it's officially published yet. I'm not sure. But now that I have one that actually has better art and stuff, it was easier to get people to play it with me. It's a real-time drag race game. So you're rolling dice. You have a track of numbers. So it's 6 cards, and each card is a different number. And you basically have to go through them in order. And so you're rolling 2 dice each. It's real-time, so you're just rolling 2 dice, and you keep re-rolling until you get a number, and then that you need to get, and then you roll another 2 dice and get to the next number. And you're trying to do that as fast as you can. But you can do 1 die under the number that you need to get and take a red line cube. If you take 2 of those and need to take another one, then you explode. You can't take 3 of them because that's messing your car up, I guess. And if you go over, you can also go over the number you get. So if you need to roll a 3, you can roll a 6 or something and take 1 red line, and that counts. So you can mess up your car in order to win the race, but that the red line damage stays each round, and you have 3 races total. Also, you get to modify your card modify your car. Card. Your car is a card, but
your car card.
But yeah, each race you reset. So you get to pick modifications that are special colored dice, and you draft these modifications that can do things like if you're rolling the yellow die, if it's a 1, 2, or 3, it can count as a 4 or something, and if it's a 4, 5, or 6, it counts as a 5. So you might want to get that modification if you see that the track that you're doing has a lot of 4s and 5s. And there's different modifications. There's one that lets you store a die. There's one that lets you roll 3 dice. There's different things. So you're drafting those at the beginning of each race, and then the race lasts 20 seconds or something. I don't know, maybe longer, depends. But yeah, so it's a really quick game, and kind of it's a race in a real-time game, so that feels like a race. It's kind of thematic. And I played it both So I played the solo game, which was just racing against a timer, which when I played that, it was like, okay, but I wanted to play against other people because I felt like that would be more like a race, and it was. But with the 4-player game, the way the scoring works is kind of weird. You get, like, the person who wins the race gets to pick one of the cards of the track, and that's their score, and then the person who gets second picks another card, and then, like, so on. So everyone gets points, but then if the track was like 1-2-2-6-2-1 or something, then just the first player gets 6 and then everyone else gets 2, and then it's like, so it doesn't really make sense getting second versus fourth, and it really depends on what the cards came out, because like in our third race it was 6-5-5-5-4, so like it didn't really matter who got first or second. It was just yeah, so we didn't like that scoring way. And in the 2-player game, it's just best 2 out of 3 races, which made more sense. So I like the 2-player scoring better. But yeah, that's Project Nos. I think 4-player like scoring would be better if it were like points versus like getting the card points, which added something weird. But yeah, that's Project Nos. And then Flapjack Flipout is a pancake flipping game. You might have seen some pictures of this, people playing on TikTok or something, but it's basically one that if you walk by, you'll be interested in it, because there's these wooden paddles and these circular cardboard discs that are pancakes, and you're basically trying to, it's a dexterity game plus memory and like set collection. You're trying to fill orders and be the fastest to fill an order, and all the pancakes are face down. You have to flip a pancake to face up to see what it is, and then you put it face down in your area, and you have to remember what it was.
And when Ambie says flip a pancake, she doesn't mean take your hand and pick up the pancake and flip it over. It's different.
You literally flip it with you have a cardboard, or not, a wooden flat, it looks like a racket, but
it's like a
spatula,
pan. Basically, right?
Yeah, it's like a spatula. So you're flipping it like in the air, and then you get to put it in your area, and when you think you have filled the order, then you ring a bell, and then you like put out your pancakes, but you have to do that face down. So like if you're wrong, you don't get the order, but if you're right, then you get it. So it's kind of hectic and memory and stuff. I only played it once. It was okay, but I think it's more exciting, just like the components of it is more exciting to me than the actual game of it. It was still kind of fun, but like not a game that I would play a lot. But my kids really like playing with the components. So they're too young to actually play games by the rules yet, because they're not 2 yet. But like they saw me flipping one of the pancakes with the wooden spatula thing, and then they tried to do it.
Oh,
really
that's so cute.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Flapjack Flipout.
I recently got a chance to play the upcoming game from AEG called 10, and that is the word 10, not the numeral 10. So it's a little bit difficult to find on Board Game Geek because there are other games with 10 in the title. 10 is a push your luck set collection bidding game where you are trying to be the player with the most points. And at the end of the game, players will score points in 4 different colors based on the number of sequential numbers they have of that color. The cards in the deck range from 1 to 9, and so the highest number of points you can score for any given color is 10. But the only way to score 10 points is if you have all 9 cards in a row. So if you have 1 through 9, you actually score 10 points. So technically, you can't score 9 points in this game. You can only score 1 through 8 or 10. Because if you have all 9 cards of a particular color, you score 10 points for the row, and that's why the game is called 10. But if you have a gap in the middle, like let's say you have the 3, 4, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, you would only score 4 points for that row because the biggest sequence of cards is 4. So how do you acquire cards? On your turn, you do a push your luck thing where you're flipping cards over from the deck, and the cards have one of 2 things on them. They either have money or numerical cards that you can add to your rows. And there are a couple of different ways that you can bust. If you flip over too many money cards, meaning money of 10 or more pips is showing, then that's a bust condition. Or if the numerical value of cards showing adds up to 11 or more. But what's interesting is the money cards you flipped over actually subtract from your numerical total as far as counting the push your luck mechanism is concerned. So you can flip over more numerical cards than you would expect, because if you flipped over money cards, it subtracts from your total to get to 11 for the numerical cards. It's a little bit confusing, but it works really well when you're playing it. It's just hard to explain without a visual to help me out. So you're flipping over cards, and then at the end of whenever you decide to stop, if you don't bust, you can choose either to take the money that is showing of the cards you flipped over or the numerical cards. If you take the numerical cards, they just get added to your rows of your colors wherever they slot in. If you take the money, then the cards go to the main supply and will be available for purchase to the other players and to you in subsequent turns. Then there are special cards in the deck that are wild in some regard. So they might have a wild number or a wild color on them. So it might be a 9, but a wild color, or it might be a wild number of green, for instance. And there is one card in the deck that is wild in both color and number, so it can be slotted in anywhere. When any of those cards come up, you do not get to just keep them on your turn. They go immediately up for auction. And so the player to your left gets first option to bid, and the auction only goes around once, so you don't get to keep going in loops. So everybody just makes one offer, and you get last option, basically, to bid on it. And then you can pay those money to tokens that you've been collecting from the money cards to take those cards. And obviously the wilds are really powerful because they can help you make those runs more easily and score that, 10 points potentially for a row of 9 cards. You play until the deck runs out and the player with the most points wins. This one is super fun. This is like the exact type of game that I want in my quiver. Like, it is light enough and easy enough to teach quickly, but strategically interesting to play and a little bit different every time based on what the players are doing. And I like that the bust mechanism is there's more to it than most games that have a push your luck mechanism because of that ability to subtract from your total. So, like, it's not quite as, straightforward as you would think. Like, if you flip over an 8, like, first off, technically any numerical card 3 or higher will cause you to bust. And so in most games, you would definitely just take the 8 and run. And you might still do that in this game, but there's the chance you'll flip over a card with money on it, which will reduce your total down and give you more options. So there's a little bit more interest there in the push your luck thing. It's not just obvious choices all the time. So I really enjoyed 10. It's releasing on September 17th at your friendly local game store. And if you like, light card games and you like push your luck mechanisms in games, I think this is a great one. And it's beautiful. Like, even though it's an abstract game, the artwork on it is actually really neat. Like, the backgrounds on the cards are pretty. So that's 10.
Cool. Sounds stressful.
A little bit, yeah. Like, I mean, every push your luck game is to some degree, but like, yeah, this one is, it's more interesting. It really, like, it scratched my brain in a cool way.
Yeah. This week for our thematic discussion, we decided to talk about replayability in games. So, what do you think of when you say a game is replayable, Crystal?
I mean, for me personally, I think I kind of do the same thing that a lot of people do, and I actually confuse replayability with variability to some degree, because, like, technically the word replayable, if you go off of its actual definition, basically every single board game, with very few exceptions, are replayable. Like you can play them again after you have played them. But I think when most board gamers use the word replayable, they actually mean, like, variable, meaning that the game has pieces and parts to it that change each time you play, or could change, theoretically, each time you play, making it different when you play it again.
Well, variability doesn't necessarily mean replayability too, because, like, variability is usually like a change in the game beginning. Or a lot of times people say variability as a change in the game beginning, but it's not necessarily, because, like, variability in the game state in the middle can happen even if the game at the beginning is very different, like in chess or something like that. Chess has a lot of replayability and variable in games, but it's always the same at the beginning. So, yeah, I don't know what word.
So wait, what's variable in chess?
No, just like the way people play is, if they play differently, it'll turn out different. Like, there's a lot of replayability in that because each game is different.
Well, but I think just to be replayable just means to be able to be played again. So every game, aside from, like, legacy games that you've completed, are replayable, right?
Yeah, but people are talking about, like, different degrees of replayability. Like, how replayable is it? Like,
Yes,
is it
that is
fun?
what most people mean, I think. Yeah, like they're
Do you
saying,
want to replay it?
yes, and that I think is the key here, is when we discuss replayability, we recognize that the word replayable means to be played again, and most board games fall into that category. But when we're talking about replayability, it's that mental feeling that you want to play it over and over and over again for whatever reason, right? Like there's enough interest there, and that could be variability in the setup that causes you to want to play it over and over again. Like you feel like there's more to explore in the game.
Yeah.
Like a lot of children's games, I would say, for an adult, don't mentally have a lot of replayability. Like when you play Candyland for it, Ambie's face right now. Like Candyland, while really great to teach kids color matching, does not have any interest really for a gamer that, you know, is kind of beyond that point, because there aren't any interesting decisions to be made, and the game isn't different at all anytime you play it, basically.
That's true. But there are different things that make games replayable, and one that comes up a lot that we already mentioned is variable setups and stuff. For me, that doesn't always mean it adds replayability, because like if the game wasn't interesting to start with for me, like if Candyland had a variable power setup, I'm not sure what it would be, but like I guess the shuffling of the deck is like a variable setup. I'm putting this in air quotes, by the way, but like it doesn't really make it much more replayable.
Right. Well, and on the flip side of that, in some instances, variability can also make games harder to approach.
And then
in things like, and no, for the record, I love all of the things that Leader Games does. Like I love their games, truly. But like it's hard for me to get a game like Vast or Root to the table, because when you vary the setup, meaning players get different roles and all of the roles are unique, it is harder to teach and then play if you make it variable. Like now, if everybody plays the same character every time, you could do that technically, but I think where those games shine is like learning the different roles and getting to do different things in them, but that it's harder to do, so I don't get those games to the table as often. Again, this is literally zero shade. Those games are amazing. Everybody should check them out, but like, yeah, it's harder for me to get those types of games to the table because of their variability.
Yeah. And then some games that are like extremely simple, like Codenames or something, that has variability in the cards, but like otherwise it's pretty simple but it's super replayable, and it's really very easy to get played a lot.
Yeah. And not just like over time, but like right in a row. You could play Codenames in a row over and over and over again. And that one, it's interesting because the people kind of are what make that game interesting, because who you're playing with can change how the game feels to some degree. And especially like, you know, Codenames Duet, the 2-player version can either be like silly or really intense or whatever. And same thing for regular Codenames. You could be playing with just like 2 pairs of 2 people and play it really like thinky, or you could play it with a giant crowd of people standing behind you all throwing out guesses, and it can be ridiculous. And so the game lends itself to those different scenarios, and it feels different when you play it.
Yeah, that's a good point, that like the game group can add variability, because like depending on what group you play, it will be a different experience, and that adds replayability and variability to games too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I know people are going to roll their eyes a little bit, but like a good example of this is Strike. Like, like you could technically play Strike incredibly straight, you know, like really serious, intense. Like, you can do that.
And that's how you're supposed to play.
Or you could do the thing that I usually do, and when I introduce Strike, I, you know, present it very seriously with my tongue in my cheek as, you know, this epic battle of gladiatorial combat in an arena, and then everybody realizes immediately, like, oh, she's being ridiculous right now, and we're about to have some silly fun, so...
But then also, even with, like, strategy games that don't have a variable setup, like some Euro games or whatever, if they usually have different things that you can do in the game, and then depending on who you're playing with, people might like different strategies, or like some people tend to block other people more in worker placement games or be more aggressive, whereas other people are more less aggressive. And so like the way people play is different. And so like playing with different groups would add a lot of variability, even if the game itself is like always the same setup or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some worker, like simple worker placement games always have the same spots on the board, for instance,
Yeah.
and whatever else. But based on what the players do, it can make the experience very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I've seen happen in the industry over the past, like, few years at least, is it feels like, especially as Kickstarter has gotten more popular, it feels like a lot of gamers often are clamoring for variability in games in thinking that will make them infinitely more replayable.
Yeah.
And that I don't think is always the case, and sometimes can bog down the games in a way that makes them, again, less appealing. But like,
yeah.
Kickstarter with its stretch goals and its add-ons and everything else, like, sometimes the bloat gets a little bit too big, but like, it feels like publishers almost feel like they have to include that kind of stuff if they're doing a Kickstarter, for instance, because, you know, players are always asking for more characters, more powers, more in-game scoring conditions, more whatever, because they think that it'll make the game more replayable. But as we just discussed, like in a game like Codenames, which doesn't have any of that stuff, it's infinitely replayable for other reasons. And I think there are a lot of games, like in my own head, part of my brain wants to think like, well, if the game is bigger and more complex and has more things, of course it would be more replayable than a simpler game with less things. But that definitely is not the case, and I know that. But like, part of my brain does kind of think in those terms, like more stuff equals more variability or more replayability. But like, that isn't necessarily the case, and some of the games that I've had the hardest time getting played are the ones where I did like back a Kickstarter and go like all in and get all of the things, and then this thing shows up and it's so intimidating that I'm like, I don't
start.
Right, like sometimes I'm kind of like, no, maybe I should just, like, if they do a Kickstarter, let's say for a new expansion to a game that I don't own, maybe instead of going all in and getting everything, I should just pick up the base game, see if I like it, and then go seek out the expansions later. Because, as I think we've discussed in past episodes, I've realized over time that I don't enjoy expansions quite as often as I would have thought I do. And there are some expansions that are really good. In fact, stay tuned to our next episode where we're actually going to talk about expansions. So that's a fun spoiler for you for our next episode. But yeah, like, I don't need more in most cases. If a game is well designed, usually it's just going to be fun right out the box without extra stuff added onto it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't get that many Kickstarters, as I've mentioned before. But yeah, and I gotta do the 18xx mention, but like those, a lot of the 18xx games do not have variable setup. They are pretty complicated games, but like they have a lot of replayability, even though it's all open information, but like players doing different things makes the game very different. And going to a more simple game, like as I was saying, chess and like Go, those are abstract games in general. I don't play abstract games that much, but there are a lot of people who get really into them and play them a lot. So there's a lot of replayability in those games, and they're very simple. Like Go is a super simple rule set, and like people play it just so much. So yeah, there's infinite replayability in such simple games. You don't need to have a lot of stuff. So I also agree.
And really, at least for me, I think early on in my tenure as a hobby gamer, I kind of had similar thoughts that like I wanted lots of content for these new games that I was buying. And I've realized over time that I am not a gamer that is going to play any given one game like 100 times. Like,
yeah.
That's just not the way I play games. It's not. I like to try new things and I like to bounce around. I very rarely play the same game 2 times in a row. Like, there are exceptions to that. Like, Strike is a good one. But like, for the most part, if we play a game at game night, if somebody says, ooh, let's play that again, my initial reaction is almost always, aw. Like, my brain, this is probably the ADHD that I am just now realizing, but like, my brain wants to go to something else. Even if I liked the thing we just played and will play it again, I don't want to do it right now, is what my brain is saying. It's amazing how these things manifest and you don't realize it.
Yeah, there are only a few games that I've played over 100 times, and they're all shorter ones. And I haven't needed expansions for those, like the Mind, the Resistance Avalon, which, I mean, that's its own game.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they're all similar. Codenames, I think, is one of them. Like the very simple rule sets that you can just play over and over again in a row. Yeah, those types of games are the ones that I replay a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree that the more complex a game, typically the less times I'm gonna play it, at least in like a short time frame. Yeah. Like over time I might, but like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because also they take a lot longer, so to play it multiple times, you have to, like, playing an 18xx game 2 times is the same amount of time as playing the Mind, like, 30 times or something like.
Which would be fun and also very exhausting.
Yeah.
All right, well, I would love to hear our listeners' thoughts on variability and replayability in games, and, like, what you all think makes a game more replayable for you. Again, we get it. Like, all games are technically replayable except for legacy games that have been completed or other probably rare exceptions.
Exit games.
Yeah, right? There you go. But I want to know what makes a game replayable for you. So head over to social media or our Board Game Geek Guild and let us know what you consider when you're judging a game's replayability.
And that's it for this week's Board Game Blitz. Visit our website, boardgameblitz.com, for video and blog content, as well as to get links to all our social media pages. This episode was sponsored by Grey Fox Games. You can now pre-order For Science, a real-time cooperative dexterity game from greyfoxgames.com. And if you want to pick up some other non-exclusive Grey Fox games at a discount, just use the code BGBLITZ21 at checkout to get 20% off. Grey Fox Games, quality games cleverly crafted. Join the Blitzketeer community on Discord by following the link in the show notes. You can support the show by leaving us a rating and review on your podcast provider. And if you want behind-the-scenes access and an invite to our private Slack channel, visit patreon.com/BoardGameBlitz. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Morrow. Technical support provided by Toby Mount. Board Game Blitz is part of the Dice Tower Network. Until next time, all my life, I hope for a game like you, and I hope that my friends like me too. Bye, everyone.
Bye! Turn, if you didn't choose to take money, you can also buy a card from the supply to add to your... I just realized that, like, I fundamentally did not start with what you're actually trying to do. I think I might start over. Okay. I was like, I've explained this backwards. It's weird because it's such a simple game, but it's one of those games that's so difficult to describe. Like, okay, I'm just gonna start entirely over. Like, completely from scratch. All of that is gone.
Code BGBLITZ21 at checkout to get 20% off Grey Fox Games. Quality games cleverly crafted. Whoops.
Oh,
I missed the exclamation point. Okay.
And a podcast about all things board games that you can listen... Oh, God, I didn't write this. Hold on.
Last time that takes two. Period.